Well, it's a real privilege and honor to get to be speaking with you guys here today. So as I'm sure almost all of you know, Lizzie and I were recently in Uganda on an MCC Thrift Learning Tour. And so I'm grateful to be able to share some of those stories with you. And so for the learning tour, we had people from Thrift coming from all across Canada to be able to see our MCC partners there. And so as we're sharing some of the photos and the stories, for all of you who might be going with the women's group to Village Green next week, just know these are the types of projects you're impacting and supporting when you're going to the thrift shop. So thanks so much to the Wildwood women for doing that, and for the large number of you who do that every week. Yeah, thank you to all of you guys. Sorry, wrong direction. So one MCC slogan is, peace is more than a wish, it's our work. And when we were in Uganda visiting the MCC Uganda staff, we were taking turns kind of sharing a little bit about the work that we're all doing. And one of them, before they started, they said, well, I would like to read out the MCC mission statement. And my eyes kind of just drifted. It's like, okay, like it's the same thing. We all have that same mission statement. But then they began reading that MCC is a worldwide organization of Anabaptist churches. And for the first time, I really felt like that was true. Sitting there across the world, sitting with people that had the same goal, the same vision, the same passion for the work that they're doing. And so it was just so great to get to meet some of MCC's peace partners there. So these are people who have been equipped to learn about peace building, and then now they're bringing that to their communities. And so it's great to see that, yeah, some of the people who had kind of come before through other MCC programs were now in their communities doing that good work. And for some of you guys who know a little bit about IVEP or SALT, there's a kind of similar project called Yaman. So that one of the girls was from Zambia, and she was doing a one-year service project in Uganda. So it was great to see that communities and countries were working together for this good work. So I want to kind of tie in the scripture verses to the work that we were seeing. So Yahweh will judge many peoples and arbitrate between mighty and distant nations. So we got the opportunity to meet one of the executive directors of one of the MCC's partner organizations, OPED. So this was Sam Ibu Okiro. And so he was one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. When he was younger, he was really interested in peace building, and some people suggested, why don't you go to EMU in the US and actually get a degree in peace building? So he did that, and after graduating, he came back to Uganda and he began working with MCC so that he was actually training peace building. And so that some of the people you saw on one of the previous slides, they had actually come from their communities to learn peace building from Sam, and then were able to return. But Sam, because he worked with MCC, also came to orientation in Akron, Pennsylvania, which I know some of you guys have been there. And he got a chance to visit one of the thrift shops. And one of the first things he told me when we started chatting, he said, I know peace is costly. And I'm thinking about, okay, his work, he understands how hard peace is to build in war-torn areas. And he's like, I saw those volunteers, and I worked alongside them for a day. And it takes so much effort to put all these things together and price them, sort them, and sell them to be able to fund our projects. So I just thought that was so neat to be able to see someone that understood the work of our volunteers. And so Sam, just like in Scripture, he knew that he had a calling to do peace building. And so he didn't just stop with his country, but Sam worked in Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, and he went to Rwanda after the genocide, working kind of with different groups to bring reconciliation and healing. He even traveled up to Lebanon and visited Palestinians in refugee camps years ago. And so it was just amazing to get to stand next to someone who just really understood peace and had devoted his entire life to work for it. I joked with him, it's it's kind of like I'm getting a chat with, or you're just like Bishop Desmond Tutu. And he's like, yeah, we went to the same university. It was just such a quiet, humble person. When we were having lunch together, he went and sat with our bus driver and bus attendant who would kind of tour around with us, and they had kind of sat off to the side. And so, of course, Sam just found his way and sat next to them to make them feel included as well. So just such an amazing person. Sam also did some incredible peace work within Uganda. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the Lord's Resistance Army. So I learned about that organization when I was in high school. So their kind of outward motto is they want to create a country ruled by the Ten Commandments. But the way they want to install that government, they are breaking all the Ten Commandments as fast as they can, as much as they can. So their usual operational status is they will go into a town, they will murder and maim people, and then they will capture the children, make the children into soldiers to fight for their army, and they'll make the girls into prostitutes to take back to their camps. So just an absolutely horrific group that's committed atrocities in a wide range of countries in the neighboring region. And so when I was later in high school, I felt like, I should do something about this. So actually at Emmanuel Baptist Church just across the alley, I was there for a youth night, and I spent some time praying with God, and I thought, I carried a little flower blossom with me. I said, if you want me to go to Uganda, have this blossom bloom. And then I don't know what I'll do, but I'll do whatever that you call me to do when I'm there. And I didn't really hear or feel anything from God that whole evening. And when I got home, I found that the blossom had opened, but I didn't feel a calling of and now you should do something about it. But it was more like it's done. And the next day I saw in the news that there had been a ceasefire signed, and a lasting ceasefire signed between the LRA and the Ugandan government. And I realized God was answering just my prayer. I mean, millions of people were praying for this, and hundreds of people were doing really a lot of peace building work. And so I thought, one day I just really hope I get to meet someone who is part of that peace process. And so then when I got to chat with Sam, Sam was one of the very few religious leaders that was actually permitted to enter into Joseph Kony's camps, so the LRA camps, to negotiate for that peace. And so it was just outstanding to me that the bravery that Sam had. And I was just so honored that we both had our little shirts on that said MCC, that I feel like I got to be part of that through a kind of a distant way. And the scripture also says, they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. So one really popular occupation in the region is cattle thief. Because cattle are worth a lot of money, and they are mobile, so they're a little bit easier to steal. And because there's bordering nations of South Sudan and Kenya, the cattle would often take journeys between multiple different countries. And a lot of the locals would joke with us like, oh yeah, my cattle got stolen last year, but it's okay, I'll probably see him in a few years later, because he'll go to South Sudan and have a trip there, and then he'll come to Kenya, and then I'll see him down the street and I can wave to him. But as you can imagine, stealing each other's cattle causes a bit of conflict. When you take away someone's entire livelihood, they might be pretty mad. And so there's in particular two groups in North Karamoja that were having a lot of tensions and violence because of the cattle thieves. And so Sam spent years kind of going and meeting with both groups and having them actually come together for meals and reminding them that they're all from the same family. And so it was just so beautiful to see that Sam was dealing with large-scale violence, but also with kind of small community-based conflicts. So one of the other partners we were visiting, this gentleman's name is Zakori, and I got time to chat with him for a little bit, and he told me that he actually used to be a cattle thief. And that was kind of his livelihood. In their culture, that's very common because males were kind of that. The intention was you're a warrior, you're a pastoralist, and your wife is a farmer. She can grow vegetables in her little garden. That's fine. And so he took part in one of MCC's trainings. And in this community, the way MCC was doing the training was they were equipping 15 people in the community, and they would train them on the condition that each of them would take on 7 students, and they would pass that training down. So I just thought it was a great way that even if MCC in 10 years isn't in that community anymore, that training is still going to continue on because it's now the community is the trainers. So Corey was one of those kind of farmers that was getting taught by another farmer. And so he was learning about better farming practices, and he was learning about peace practices as well. And so during that process, he realized, maybe being a cattle thief was not very beneficial for the community. And so now he actually works alongside his wife, and he farms and tills the ground. One thing that he says that's a real big challenge for their community is there's a river that flows through, and every year it floods immensely. And when they go to plant their fields, they never know how far that river is going to flood. And so this last year, he lost about half of his fields to river flooding. And so this community's been asking the local government for a long time for like a dike system that the government hasn't built for them. So they were asking me, like, can I go and talk to the local government? And I thought, I don't think the local government cares what I think. But I did say one thing that isn't important, and I'm hearing from you, and I confirmed with the project leader. I said, has the river flooding been getting worse in the last few years, or more unpredictable? And the project leader said yes, and climate change is a huge factor for that for us. So I said, while I can't convince the local government to build you dike systems, I can contribute to climate change. That I can to work with others to realize the effects of climate change and how big of an impact that's having on you, and that we can do better at mitigating things on our end. And that all the people I'm here with today, they're all from the thrift shops. And our MCC thrift shops, one of our goals is to help reduce carbon emissions by able to resell items rather than producing new products. So he was grateful to hear that there was that connection and that we were working towards helping them in a kind of a different way. But also that leaves us with the serious concern of, my guess is I contributed more carbon emissions in that week that I visited him as he's probably going to spend over the next 10 years. And so as Canadians, we need to be supporting climate adaptation, because this community has contributed basically nothing to the climate change crisis, but they're suffering much more immense effects than we are currently. And so it's part of our obligation to care for people that we've caused harm to. And one thing I didn't feel comfortable asking him, but I wondered, I thought, how many more years is his land going to get flooded until he realizes, even though their farming practices are much better now, he's still struggling to feed his family if he's losing half of his fields? At what point is he going to turn back to stealing cattle out of necessity to feed his children? So that in this region, we saw that poverty and climate change were having really direct impacts on peace. One nation will not raise the sword against another, and never again will they train for war. So Sam, when he returned to his community, after he had worked in a lot of different countries for peace building, he decided he wanted to provide free peace building training for anyone that was interested. So he sat under a tree and said, anyone who wants to learn about peace, come find me here. And so his first day, 2 people came to learn about peace. And now, several years later, they have 125 participants across 5 villages. And so as we were sitting and getting to hear their stories underneath the trees, I just imagined maybe that was the tree that Sam started under. So one of the challenges in this part of Uganda is domestic violence. For many women, they experience that in the home, including femicide. And so when there's peace building training here, one of the topics that they cover is gender-based violence. And so they're providing trainings on different ways of doing conflict. They're talking directly about kind of men beating their wives. And when we were there, quite a few times men would kind of stand up and say like, oh, one of the things that I value about this peace building process is I learned about gender-based violence, and now there's no more domestic violence in my household. And I saw like, wow, they're just like publicly saying I stopped beating my wife. And so it was just really incredible to see their openness and understanding that, that this was wrong, and that now they were learning new tools. And I also heard that from some of the women, so I felt comfortable that it wasn't just, the man got up there and said it. And also all their houses don't have doors, and so I think the community would pretty quickly call him out if he said that he stopped beating his wife. And what they do is when there is conflicts in a family or a land dispute, these peace groups have been so well respected in the communities that they'll actually call on this group and say, can you come help us mediate a problem? And so I was talking with one of the participants, and he said, yeah, almost daily they might get the whole group together, like around 25 people from one of the villages might come and sit with one family, and then they'll talk about the challenges together. And I thought, like, wow, what a really unique way of interacting with a problem. It's not kind of like quietly shuffled under the rug, maybe you go see a counselor, but it's something that the community can solve together. And I thought that's much more likely that will stay a positive relationship afterwards, because the community can keep you accountable. So they were also learning agricultural practices within the peace building, because Sam recognized that while peace was a prerequisite for life and had to come first, the community was also struggling with being able to sustain itself. So they were providing agricultural trainings, and that was boosting their farming output by about 75%. And they're just using conservational agricultural practices. So it wasn't like they were adding new inputs. It was just about learning about rotating your crops, about planting corn and beans together. And these practices were just having such an impact in their community. And they were also learning about proper animal husbandry. Several participants mentioned that their goats kept getting twisted toenails, and they didn't really know what to do, and often the goats would break their ankles or get hurt or stuck or infected. And so they were shown how they can heat up a rod and kind of file off the hoof or the toenail. And so as a community, they began saving circles. And so their kind of first groups would put about 25 cents Canadian into their saving circles. And then if someone wanted to borrow from within that saving circle, they would have a 10% interest rate, but allowed them to do projects they could never do if they were saving just by themselves. So we got to see one of the farmers. He had purchased a goat through the saving circle money. And it was a female goat, and so it got pregnant. It had twins, which he was super excited about, because it meant that he could pay off his loan and give one to another neighbor, so that neighbor could also then begin raising goats as well. And he was now up to about 7 goats, and once he got to have 11 goats, he was going to trade them all in for 1 oxen, and then that would help be able to till their soil no tillage. Do any of the farmers remember that term where you're not actually? Okay, so he's doing zero tillage, but the other, like with planting, the ox would be able to help, so they would be able to expand the number of fields they were using. And this was Susan standing with Lizzie, and she told us her story. So she had come from a husband that was extremely abusive to her physically and all other areas of abuse, and he was also very unfaithful to her. And after she had began attending the peace training group, she realized that she was in a really unsafe and unhealthy place. And so she left her husband and stayed with some of the other Peace Club members. And after a few months, her husband realized he done screwed up. Susan was a really great person, and he really missed having her around. And so he said, please come home. And she was smart enough to say, you come to the peace group. That's kind of the condition. And so that he came to the peace group, and he learned about things like gender-based violence, and he learned about some of the other challenges he was having in life. And the community could kind of see, okay, his life was changing. And then Susan felt safe enough to be able to go back and live with him. And while we were there, she has had like enormous joy. It was just so enthusiastic about everything, and she was just so happy with life. Things that kind of come from being so abusive to now she was living with joy. And so it was great to see that this peace building work was changing nations, was changing communities, and changing families. People will sit under their own vines and fig trees. So one of the partners we saw, they were from an Anglican church group, and as a church group on the third week of November, every year they'll fundraise for tree saplings because they recognize that climate change is affecting their communities, and they know they need to be planting more trees, and that a lot of the area has been deforested over conflicts or kind of farm expansion, and so they know that they need to be planting more trees to help their rains be a bit steadier. And so that as a group of churches in the area, they would raise funds, and they would plant those trees in other churchyards or at schools, or give them out to farmers that didn't have any trees on their land, so that they would have a tree for their own shade. I just thought that was so beautiful and biblical, and I was so impressed that that these churches were raising hundreds of dollars and planting thousands of trees. And so I just thought, like, wow, what a good a challenge for myself and for the churches that I'm seeing of, what are some practical ways that we can be helping our communities and working to mitigate climate change. And so Kara's story, actually, I'm really sad now I didn't add in one more of my pictures. So this was one of our partners where they're, again, training farming practices. It's just the beginning of dry season, so they've harvested their really large fields, but now they're kind of maintaining their kitchen gardens. But because things are so dry and it's a 45-minute walk to get water, how they water their little kitchen gardens is kind of their excess water from cooking and cleaning. But then to kind of maximize that water retention, they'll do a couple of different techniques. So this was kind of using like a large plastic bag, and so just cut holes in the top, plant their tomatoes in there, and then mix in manure. And as they water it, then all the water stays with just the plants. And so those tomatoes that are probably about like chest high, they're telling us that 2 or 3 weeks ago, they were just like little saplings that they had planted. So it was just incredible to see how successful these kind of creative practices could be for them. And kind of just behind those plants that you can't quite see in this picture, they had taken all plastic bottles that were typically from like NGOs coming to visit, and they would plant them in a little circle in several concentric rings, and then they could kind of make them into like little mini raised beds, so that it would kind of help from soil erosion, and as you pour the water into the center circles, it would kind of just slowly drain out to the others and not get wasted on the dry ground. Thanks, Kara, for sharing that story, because I was also impressed with their thrifty uses of plastic. This was one of the women that we got to meet. Her name was Anna. So Anna was we figured about 7 months pregnant. And she was one of the farmers that was in this project, where she was actually teaching 7 other farmers now that she had kind of gone through her training. At the beginning of weeding season, there was kind of a little bit of rise of crime in the community. And so the police had the creative idea of, well, we know what the problem is. It's the men. So they came in at night, and any man who was at home at night, they took him and arrested him for 9 months. Crime went down, problem solved. But for Anna, that means she's pregnant and it's weeding season. So that means she's got 2 options. The most common option taken in that area would be go find yourself another husband. You're probably not going to get your husband out of jail. Just go find someone else from a different community. He can help take care of you or at least support you in your work. And I decided to go the other route, and she did all of the weeding herself. And because she was part of this MCC group, she's training 7 other farmers, and so then they could move between the farms together, and that way it kind of eased the labor a bit. On the right there is Michael. So that was her husband that was was jailed. And originally when they were telling us that story about like when her husband got taken off to jail, I thought like, oh, that's kind of awkward. He's like standing right here. And then I realized like, oh, like he didn't do anything. It was just entirely arbitrary that, well, you were a man, it was night, you're jailed. And then harvest came, and again, Anna made that hard choice of, do I go get another man, or do I do harvest by myself? And so again, she chose to do harvest by herself. And then on the left there, you can see that's actually a granary, and so it's woven sticks all the way around, and then the thatch roof they actually just put on top, so it's completely concealed, but enough airflow can kind of get in to dry the maize, but that other animals or pests can't get in to destroy the crop. And so, Anna had kind of harvested all by herself, and then she used her proceeds to bail her husband out of jail, and still had enough left over to get herself a little market stall so that she could be able to sell some of her corn there. So being able to talk with Anna was just so impressed with her. And then one of the things at the end of her story she shared, she's like, well, we could really use a well closer into our community because it's such a far walk. And so our group's instantly like, oh my gosh, let's just like buy you a well. And then we heard from our MCC country reps, and they said, actually, this community is doing a saving circle, and what we're encouraging them to do is, as a whole community, to build that well together. And I thought, wow, what a really smart long-term strategy, and kind of fitting with being underneath your own vine and fig tree, that this well was going to be that community's well. It wasn't from another place. They had done this together. And so I thought, yeah, what a great way to bring that community together. And so, I was just, I kept getting reminded that the way MCC works with partners and having all those staff be local in their community to really understand what the needs are in the community just makes such a big difference. Because again, I would have gone in there and I would have made mistakes, and I would have repeated kind of colonial ideas. And so it's just so good to be able to see that the communities, with kind of just a little bit of support from MCC, were able to just become much healthier. With no one to make them afraid, the mouth of Yahweh Omnipotent has spoken. So one thing I found when we were in these communities is the joy that they had. In this community, when we pulled up on the bus, people saw that it was from MCC, and so they ran from their village to greet us and hug us, and then we danced all the way back to visit with them there. And just to see the joy they had for life that they were living, and for the ways that they're able to share with each other, and the ways that they have been able to find peace in so many different levels within their communities. And as many of the farmers knew that they had kind of been recipients of generosity, and again, something that Anna had said to us when she found out that their project was supported by MCC, and it was actually in part from thrift shops that she was receiving funds. She was just so astounded. She assumed it was from like government and it was just from this blank entity. But to know, oh, there's other people around the world that care about me and my village and are working hard to help us out. That really meant a lot to her. And we could see that generosity then was getting passed around in the community. So this is Morris, and so he's the project leader in this area, and he told us about one of the farmers in their community. He had done well for himself that year and was able to feed his family. And in this area, we're in northern eastern Uganda, so there's a lot of refugees stemming from South Sudan that are passing through. So there's a stranger in the community, and every day kept going up to this farmer and begging for food. And so this farmer responded very differently than I think most people would. He said, okay, come back with me to my land. And he marked out one of his 12 acres, and he said, this is your land now. He said, here's your seed, and I'm going to teach you how to farm. And then now you don't have to be hungry anymore. And I thought, wow, what a radical form of generosity that he was able to share to that person. And yeah, as Graham mentioned, kind of the election coming up, there's a lot of this fear of outsider, of people coming into the country and taking what's ours. And I was just so inspired that in this community that was struggling to survive, as they're seeing refugees come in, that they're greeting them and they're supporting them on their way closer into the center of the country to find refugee camps. So I thought that's a good lesson for us to learn, because when we talk in Canada, on average we're maybe having about 20,000 refugees come to our country every year. In Uganda, they would be talking in the millions. And so it's just a very different understanding of what it means to be a neighbor. And I think that's a lesson for us too. So I found this trip really impactful. It was just a great experience to get to see our partners working for peace. As we're kind of having Peace Sunday come up, this is one of the candles that they made in their projects there. So as a community, they use their savings circle to purchase beehives, because the bees provide honey, they provide wax to make candles, they irritate the elephants so they don't come into their land, and then of course they pollinate their crops. And so kind of on behalf of our partners there, here's a candle for kind of future Peace Sundays here. So yeah, and I'll say again, just thank you so much for listening to me, and yeah, I'm really glad to be welcomed into this community. I keep getting to share stories and hear stories from yourselves as well. Thank you.